Welcome back to another episode of GamingBolt, guys. Today we're going to talk about 15 games you should play on hard mode. Games with demanding difficulty aren't always everyone's cup of tea. A lot of times, people just want to play to relax and escape. But there's no shortage of gamers out there who are very much looking for that sort of thing in their games. Some games, of course, are designed around that notion, to the exclusion of almost everything else. But there are also other experiences out there that offer something along those lines as an option. Here we are going to take a look at a few games that do just that, by offering harder difficulty modes that are really balanced and that, if you want your games to push back, should definitely be checked out. The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 standout higher difficulty settings didn't arrive until after the game's launch, but anyone who enjoyed the game's mechanics and wants to engage with them on a deeper level should go back and experience it that way at least once. With harder enemies, scarcer resources, listen mode, and several HUD elements being disabled, and more, grounded mode is a grueling trek through The Last of Us Part 2's post-apocalypse, while the option to turn permadeath on brings even more intensity to an already intense experience. Halo Infinite. Halo games have always been known for how successfully they ramp up things with their higher difficulty settings, and that's true for Halo Infinite as well. Heroic and legendary difficulty options are still unmissable for Halo fans, turning the game's excellent combat into even more tense and tactical affair that requires full and proper utilization of all the tools you have at your disposal. The Evil Within. The Evil Within can be a pretty challenging game even if you're playing it on a normal difficulty, but if you want the game to really push you to your absolute limits, its Akumu mode is more than happy to deliver that. On top of making combat even more brutal and resources even scarcer, Akumu mode also makes it much harder to cheese the game using its stealth mechanics. It can be almost frustratingly difficult at times, but for the hardcore horror enthusiasts out there, it's also something that needs to be experienced at least once. Ghost of Tsushima. Like Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima also added its lethal difficulty option in a post-launch update. And while it isn't nearly as punishing, it is still quite an incredible experience, especially for those who are all about the precision in their combat. Lethal difficulty makes enemies hit significantly harder, so that a couple of hits are often enough to outright kill you, and they become more eagle-eyed and alert during stealth, while the timing windows for dodges and parries are also reduced by quite a margin. Those who already have a grip on the game's system might still find it a tad easy, but it still becomes a much more involved experience. Resident Evil 2, 2019. Playing and replaying Resident Evil games on higher difficulties is something of a time-honored tradition for series fans. And like more than a few other games in the franchise, 2019's Resident Evil 2's remake excels in this area, among others. On hardcore difficulty, you have your regular bumps to how durable and deadly enemies are, but on top of that, the game also completely removes autosaves, while making saving entirely manual and dependent on finite resources that you have to scavenge in the form of course, ink ribbons. Rushing through a hallway packed with zombies while Mr. X is chasing you down as you desperately try to make it to a safe room and save your game can be quite a rush. Horizon Forbidden West. Even though you're facing down gargantuan killer robots that are armed to the teeth with significantly more primitive weapons, Horizon Forbidden West can be quite the breezy experience for the most part on normal difficulty. Crank it up to hard or very hard though, and it almost turns into a different game. Studying your enemies and learning about their weaknesses becomes much more important, while using your full arsenal with different ammo types and what have you goes from being a nice bonus to becoming a necessity. Dead Space. In space, no one can hear you scream. And in Dead Space's Impossible mode, you're going to be screaming a lot, for many reasons. Unlocked after finishing the game, Impossible mode drives up the horror by giving you far fewer resources to use, while also turning the already terrifying necromorphs into even more of a nightmare. Not just with harder attacks and more erratic movements, but also with much better dodging abilities. It's not for the faint of heart, but Dead Space's Impossible mode is definitely worth checking out for horror fans. Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Ori and the Will of the Wisps isn't afraid of pushing back against players at times even if you're playing it on normal difficulty, which is so often the case with similar Metroidvania titles. Those who are experienced with the game's combat, however, should definitely check it out in hard mode, because that's where the combat really shines. With enemies hitting much harder and having bigger pools of health, properly utilizing your full arsenal and paying greater attention to progression becomes crucial. F1 2021. F1 2021, as an uncompromising, hard-boiled racing sim, is not exactly the most accessible experience as it is, which means a great many of its players are looking for the challenge it brings anyway. If you really want to kick things up a notch on that front, boost the AI's difficulty up to 80, 89, and you'll notice an immediate difference. Learning the tracks, going all in on vehicle upgrades, and spending time tuning your vehicle to meet very specific requirements will soon become second nature to you. The ASCENT. The ASCENT's difficulty has clear balancing issues, which was doubtly true at launch, especially if you're playing the game solo, even on the easiest difficulty. If you have a full party of 4 that's going through the game though, we'd seriously suggest going straight to hard difficulty settings. Tense, bombastic combat affairs become even more so, and every firefight feels like a thrilling, adrenaline-fueled, chaotic romp. Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 has many strengths, but the combat, as fun as it can be, doesn't really blow you away like, say, the characters do. Well, unless you play on insanity difficulty. Enemies become clever, throw out their powers and abilities much more effectively, constantly try and flank you, and are able to take much more damage before going down. The end result is a grueling experience, but with a far more satisfactory combat. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild's base experience has just one difficulty setting, but Master Mode, which was added to the game as DLC, brings an interesting twist. From enemies hitting harder and having more health to new golden variants appearing to put up even tougher fights to even the number of Lionels in certain areas being increased, Master Mode makes Link's journey through Hyrule significantly trickier. Of course, that encourages you to leverage the game's incredible physics engine and systems in more creative ways, making for an even more satisfying experience. Half-Life 2. A masterpiece like Half-Life 2 is going to be an unforgettable experience no matter what difficulty you're playing it on, but if you want to completely immerse yourself in its tense, often terrifying offerings, hard mode is the way to go. Deadlier enemy attacks, larger enemy health pools, recovery items being less effective, and more come together in a hard mode that is, for the most part, surprisingly well balanced. Metal Gear Solid 2. While most difficulty modes we've mentioned here have earned a place in this feature because of unique hooks or solid balancing, Metal Gear Solid 2 European Extreme Mode is so frustratingly and ridiculously brutal that you simply have to see it to believe it. On this setting, the entire game becomes littered with sections that may not have been even remotely challenging under ordinary circumstances, but end up feeling like insurmountable walls that you can only bang your head against. Of course, if and when you do manage to break through those walls, there's nothing else quite like it. Gears 5. Gears of War is another series that has built up a reputation of delivering excellent experiences on harder difficulties over the years, and Gears 5 doesn't disappoint in that regard. When played on experienced difficulty, and especially on insane difficulty, Gears 5 turns into an insane slaughterhouse, where you're the cattle and are completely helpless in preventing hordes of enemies mowing you down with frightening efficiency, power, and precision. Overcoming those odds, however, never feels impossible because, like its predecessors, Gears 5 strikes an excellent balance on this front, no matter how difficult it gets. That's it for today, guys. Thanks for stopping by GamingBolt. If you like this video, hit the like button, hit the bell, hit the subscribe. We'll see you next time on GamingBolt.